Welcome everyone again to the Clean Fuels and Hydrogen podcast. I'm fortunate today to be joined by Chris Shugart, SVP of Operations at Ambient Fuels. Chris comes from a really long line of industry-leading companies in the renewable space, such as Renewables and Pattern Energy. Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Ben. Happy to be here. I have to say it's my first time being on a podcast, so I'm excited.
Yeah, honestly, I'm new to this myself, so we're both in the same boat. I'd love for you to start off just by telling us a little bit more about your background. I know you've been in this space for a while now, right? So just give us a little bit more color as to your time in this space.
All right, happy to do it. Started my career in the gas turbine power. I've been in energy my whole career and in power my whole career. Started out first with an equipment manufacturer, getting to know how some of this machinery works, but then fairly early on recruited into Calipine, which is one of the early gas-fired development generation companies. And really, my specialty there became industrial cogeneration. And I really loved getting into heavy industry, getting into refineries and chemical plants, understanding how they use energy, how they make their products, how they make money, and working with them on energy efficiency opportunities to bring technology and commercial solutions together in a way that worked great for them. So that was kind of my first foray into what would kind of later become my career in clean energy. Around the mid 2000s, when renewables were kind of just starting to take off, I made the leap out of kind of the well-established industry into what was at that time pretty early days for wind. In the mid 2000s, I joined what ultimately became Pattern Energy, which was one of the bigger wind pure play owner operators. Had the pleasure there of working in both development and then as we put steel in the ground and got a lot of wind built. I also had some opportunities to work on the operational side to understand what it's like to, once you've built these things, keep them running efficiently and pumping out that green power. So spent most of my career there, had a wonderful time with that. I would say about 2 years ago, wind had become a very mature business. It went from a very niche, very emerging industry when I first got into it to now, a very middle of the fairway, very mature business. And I was kind of ready to do something new, to kind of look at what's the next thing out there for clean energy. And that's how I came to join Ambient Fuels earlier this year, and now excited to be working with a pioneer in green hydrogen.
Awesome. And I'm sure that hydrogen, the clean fuels, they've been on your radar for a while. And I'm sure, since you've joined Ambient Fuels, right, it's even more so, integral part of your day to day. How would you define clean fuels and the hydrogen market, in terms of a broad overview, but also more like specifically like how it relates to heavy industry and decarbonizing that aspect of the market?
Yeah, so I'll start really big picture, and it's part of what attracted me to the space in the first place. There's obviously an enormous global push now for decarbonization broadly, and the majority of that is going to be addressed with renewable energy technologies that I was talking about. So wind and solar and batteries and transmission are really going to do a good job of addressing, about 2/3 of kind of the global carbon emissions that we've got to find strategies for reducing. But there's about a third of, about 30% of global carbon emissions, particularly in industrial sectors, where electricity can't really be an effective solution. You need a molecule either to be a feedstock to make other products, or you need very high temperature heat that's hard to replicate with electricity. So that's what really I found really intriguing about this space was, hey, here's a whole nother basket of decarbonization that up to now the world hadn't made a lot of progress on, but now for a number of reasons look like it's positioned to have a lot of success in.
Yeah, absolutely. And why would you say, why clean fuels and hydrogen, and why now? And you might have been hearing about this a little bit more than me further back, but why is the clean fuels and hydrogen in relation to decarbonizing heavy industry manufacturing becoming kind of more of a bigger conversation?
Yeah, it is wild how far that has gone in the last 18 months, right? I actually first looked at green hydrogen 18 months ago. At the time, decided to do something else for a short interim period. But at the time, it still felt very theoretical, very let's do some research and write some white papers. And I've always been a put steel in the ground guy, so it didn't, 18 months ago, it didn't quite feel like, and I think this turned out to be accurate. It wasn't quite ready to start deployment yet, but it was turning the corner and starting to really intrigue some people. And I think it was a couple of things. I think you were. I think the biggest thing was the considerably more focus from pretty much all industries on decarbonization. That until not very long ago, it was something that was either not on the radar at all, or as an aspirational thing for 2050. It's a long way away. I'm not sure we'll get there yet. I think over the last 18 months, certainly very much pre-IRA, you were seeing a lot of emphasis from investors, from customers, from employees, a lot of different factors pushing industrial businesses in the world in this direction. So just in the last 18 months, there's been a serious, look in this direction to think about decarbonization strategies in heavy industry, and beginning to find some of the low-hanging fruit opportunities that made sense and could get moving. And even pre-IRA, we were finding some of those. We were finding opportunities where it was just the right mix of what their needs are, what their motivations were as a company. Maybe it was still a little bit of a cost premium, but a lot of industries could say, hey, I've got a really good reason why this makes sense to me. I can get value from my customers for that, or it's part of our overall corporate strategy around decarbonization. So there's already, I think, pre-IRA momentum building in that space. There was technology momentum building, but it's certainly been, I think first some of the events in Europe that radically changed the economics of all kinds of energy, and shortly after that, the IRA. So it's been pretty phenomenal from 18 months ago, a couple of people more in the academic and R&D spaces doing white papers, to now the political amount of energy going into the space to actually make this happen is phenomenal.
Yeah, absolutely. And, all of that makes sense. And, I think to a lot of us, especially in industry professionals, will know exactly why heavy industry manufacturing is a huge area that, we need to focus on decarbonizing. For someone that may not be as familiar with why that industry in particular is so critical that we decarbonize, walk us through what about heavy industry and manufacturing lends itself to needing to be decarbonized, and why perhaps hydrogen, for example, presents to be like a unique solution to doing so. Yeah.
So probably everybody has driven by a refinery or an ammonia plant at some point in their life and just saw the scale of these facilities of just so you get a sense of the magnitude of these operations. And you also get a sense from looking at them that they're very technically complex. There's a lot of different pieces of equipment and hardware to accomplish whatever their business is. And it's a very energy intensive business. They use a lot of energy, a lot of electricity, a lot of natural gas to ultimately make their products. I kind of think of two main flavors of heavy industry, particularly as it relates to hydrogen. So the first is where hydrogen is needed as a feedstock. So it's actually a raw material that you're using to make your products, whether that's to desulfurize gasoline or to make ammonia for fertilizers. So it is a key ingredient, if you will, in your product, and it's something that you've got to have hydrogen. And in that parts of the business, it's more a question of how you're going to make it. So it's not a question of should I use hydrogen or not? They do, and they have for a long time. the vast majority of hydrogen, consumed in the world today is in those heavy industries for feedstocks. And so it really is about how do you make it? And today, almost all of it is made from natural gas. And you're literally taking a methane molecule, breaking it open to get the hydrogen. If you remember your chemistry, it's CH4. So you break that molecule open to take the hydrogen, but then all the CO2 all the carbon ends up getting vented to the atmosphere as CO2. And then there's additional fuel consumption for heating and things that adding more CO2. So it's been a very reliable, relatively low cost source of hydrogen, but it's a very high carbon process. And so that industry has known that hydrogen's got to be, cleaning up their hydrogen production's got to be a huge part of their decarbonization overall. Because for those companies in those industries, what I just described there is a substantial portion of their greenhouse gas emissions. So maybe I'll come back to in a minute some of the pathways they have. But the other part of industry I think about is industries that primarily are using natural gas today and using it primarily for heat. So it could be furnaces, could be boilers, but you're burning natural gas to make heat. And so you don't have to use hydrogen. Anything that will create heat works for you. Heat is what you're looking for. You're not needing hydrogen per se for a feedstock. So that is an even bigger universe than the feedstock part that I mentioned. And that's exciting where, you can, there certainly are things like biomass or renewable natural gas. There are a variety of alternative fuels that are available for meeting that sector. And so there it's more about how can hydrogen compete with those other sources of heat in economics and carbon footprint and things like that. So it's cool. We're talking to customers every day in kind of both of those lanes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, it's interesting you touched upon both hydrogen and like other forms of biofuels, such as like RNG and things of that nature. On our first episode, where we kind of covered like a holistic view of the market with our guest, Naomi, Naomi Bonus, you're familiar with her, right? You guys have a little bit of some crossover, right?
We do. Yeah, she's an advisor to Ambient Fuels, and she's been amazing, as you know on your call. Runs the hydrogen program at Stanford there, which is one of the leaders in this space on the academic front. So she's been a wonderful source of advice for us, and certainly has a very broad view of the broader universe beyond kind of some of the focused heavy industries I've talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's unique about Naomi, and one thing I want to raise with you is, she kind of touched upon the fact that, both biofuels such as RNG, such as, sustainable aviation fuels and things of that nature, and then you have hydrogen, all those different types of products have different decarbonization applications. You touched upon, let's say if we're talking about RNG and hydrogen, right? Those are two examples. They're both contenders, right, to, let's say, decarbonize heavy industry and manufacturing. I know and Ambient Fuels have a vested interest in hydrogen being the golden ticket, right, just based off of what you guys do. But can you speak to a little bit, like maybe a bit of the differences between the two and where you could foresee one edging out the other?
Yeah. And first of all, I'm definitely in the all the above camp. I think any technology that we could talk about that's a decarbonization pathway, there are places and industries and use cases where it makes sense. So that's something we spend a lot of time trying to think through various industries. How does hydrogen fit in each of those? Where are we going to be competitive today? Where are we going to be competitive tomorrow? So, on the hydrogen feedstock side of things, where you have to make hydrogen, but it's really a question of how do you make it? We're focused on electrolysis of water to create hydrogen with electricity. The other main pathway is starting with something like natural gas. Blue hydrogen is the name you'll hear, but starting with natural gas, doing something similar to what I described earlier, where you're separating the carbon, but you're capturing the carbon, and then you're sequestering the carbon or making other products. Both of those make an end clean hydrogen that our customers are frankly fairly indifferent to that end product. So it really is about the economics, the risks of developing the technology. There's a place for both of those pathways. In the long run, I think I think most experts think that green hydrogen is going to win that the biggest market share there. It's got the most promise for costs coming down, both the capital costs, the cost of the renewables, which is a big part of the feedstock, and efficiency. So long run, we think hydrogen is going to win that battle. But there's a lot of applications that are moving ahead with blue hydrogen pathways that do make a lot of sense. It's interesting. You mentioned some of the things like sustainable aviation fuels or renewable diesel. In a lot of those cases, we're actually essentially a feedstock into those production processes. So we're not necessarily competing with those. That's what's so fascinating about this whole hydrogen space. So you take hydrogen, for example, you can make a hydrogen-fueled airplane, but I think what seems to be heading toward getting more of market share is sustainable aviation fuels that end up looking like a jet fuel that you have today, so you can use all your equipment you've got. But making that stuff often requires hydrogen. So oftentimes, we're saying, hey, maybe we're not selling to the airplane operator. Maybe we're selling to the SAF producer who needs sources of clean hydrogen as they're making that product. And there's similarly hydrogen pathways to make green gasoline or green methanol or other things where you're still using those end products, but you're making them in a much more environmentally friendly way. So I think almost any sector we can think of, it's not so much competition for us. It's kind of where do we plug into that space? Are we competing for the end use, or are we kind of a part of their production processes? So it's been kind of fun to work through that, and every piece of the sector was a little bit different there.
I really, really love, Chris, how you touched upon, the way you touched upon all those points, specifically with the fact that you guys aren't competing with each other. One thing we talked about on the first episode was potentially the all or nothing mentality, or this way or that way mentality that a lot of people within the industry as a whole, whether it's oil and gas, conventional oil and gas or conventional fossil fuels against renewables, or whether it be hydrogen against, biofuels, and this mentality, this aspect of dropping the all or nothing mentality and thinking about it more as kind of deploying everything all at once. There's no golden ticket to each different application. There are people that argue that sustainable aviation fuels or biofuels are better for aviation, even though hydrogen is potentially an option for aviation, and vice versa with other different applications. And I think it's true. I think that we need to think of all these different solutions as an option and not claiming one to be the best versus the other. And you're absolutely right that, hydrogen can be used to power a facility that's producing sustainable aviation fuels, right? And I think that's something a lot of people potentially don't realize, So I love that you touched upon that. What would you say are some of the challenges? You probably know firsthand, like what challenges, you're running into at Ambient Fuels, or challenges, other people are running into with, deploying hydrogen on the market, especially when it comes to decarbonizing heavy industry. What would you say are like the key things that you think are going to be the major roadblocks?
Yeah, and part of that, I think about, we're pitching customers every day in this space, and as I kind of think through what the cycle we tend to go through with our customers and how that translates to ultimately getting these facilities built. And it's amazing how fast the industry is moving through these steps I'm about to describe. But it starts with just awareness and education. I think it's early this year. Most of our customers couldn't even say what green hydrogen means, much less have a well thought out strategy of does it fit in their decarbonization roadmap or not. So a lot of education and awareness, a lot of the perceptions that that's very high price and can't be a good solution, and those economics have changed radically. So So I think just awareness and education is a first step. And I love how much energy is going into this, from the academic sector, the government sector, these hub activities that we can maybe touch on that are bringing a lot of people together to kind of have these discussions. Once we get past that, certainly economics, I think for post-IRA, the feedstock applications, I think, have gone from a cost premium to a cost savings. So, before it was, hey, it's going to cost you a little bit more, but you've got some ESG goals and other strategic reasons why it makes sense. Now it's just plain old reduced operating costs. And by the way, you're going to get some environmental benefits, but that's kind of gravy for you. In the, in other sectors, it's still a modest cost premium. It's much less now post IRA. But in some places, it's still a modest cost premium. And so in those cases, there's going to be end users who have strategic and other drivers. They say, hey, it's a relatively modest premium. I'm going to go for it. But we've had customers that have said, hey, I'm not going to pay one more nickel for this unless I got a customer downstream of me that's going to pay me another nickel. The good thing about that, and I totally get that approach. Good thing about that is I think almost every end product out there, the market is starting to ask manufacturers, hey, if I want green steel, if I want green concrete, and I'm willing to pay a premium for that, a modest premium for that, how do you create that product? How do you tag it? But then, our industrial customers can say, yeah, I'll pay you a premium for this clean hydrogen or clean fuel because I'm able to get, added revenues for that downstream. And then the last thing I'll mention, particularly in the industrial sectors, a lot of folks have used natural gas for 100 years and have never used hydrogen before. And they're nervous about it. They don't understand it. They don't understand the safety and the reliability and the technical integration things, which can be complex. It's not natural gas and hydrogen are two very different molecules in terms of their characteristics. So we've had several customers that have gotten all the way through those gates I described, but they're now at, boy, how do I have to modify my plant? How is my plant going to operate differently? How do I make sure that I keep all my people safe? Nobody's going to do this if there's any chance it's not going to be done totally safely. So we welcome that because that's fun to kind of dive into those details with customers and figure it out. But those are kind of all the steps that I think customers have to go through to ultimately get there.
Yeah, absolutely. And the education piece, it's almost one of the reasons why we decided to do this podcast, obviously Pipermatics, we're a staffing and recruitment agency. We specialize in renewable energy and clean tech recruitment. But for us, this is not about that. This is about educating, people that may not be as familiar with the markets, the same way we are. A lot of the people we wind up reaching out to and placing at businesses in the clean fuels and hydrogen space are coming from oil and gas super majors. They're working on petrochemicals and things that are not, clean at all. So for them, when we're going to market, part of our process is educating them and getting them excited about this space. And I love that that's part of your process as well. You're, it sounds like going to a steel manufacturer and saying, hey, have you considered hydrogen as a solution? And they might not know anything about green hydrogen. They just know it's, the periodic table connection, right? So I really love that. From your perspective, right, how is there anything else that needs to happen for, aside from what we discussed, for heavy industry and manufacturing to truly realize hydrogen, the potential for hydrogen? And that's part one. And part two is, what else needs to happen, more broadly speaking, in the hydrogen market for hydrogen itself to realize its full potential of decarbonizing multiple different sectors of the industry?
Yeah. So I think I'll take the second one first. Analogies back to early days of wind. We had federal tax incentives to bring the cost of wind down. So that part of it is very analogous to the IRA that just got passed of attractive incentives that bring down the cost side of it. But equally important in the early days of wind was renewable portfolio standards. Where there were, and these were state level initiatives, not everywhere, but some of the bigger markets where you had the cost coming down, and you had a forcing function to kind of ensure that some deployment happens. So you weren't solely waiting for the market to organically pick up on this and make it happen. You had some forcing function. And we don't have that yet. I think a lot of countries around the globe are looking toward that or doing some of that. The U.S. is not yet. I think we will start to see some state level. I don't, not real likely we get a federal one. We never got a federal one, RPS around renewables, although folks tried many times. But I think we'll absolutely see some state level initiatives, and whether it's saying, hey, we want all of our gas distribution utilities to blend in 5% hydrogen into their pipelines, and there's a cost recovery mechanism for that. So it's not forcing something that's economic on companies. It's creating a structure where they're compensated for doing that, and it's good business for them. So I'd love to see some of that taking root. I think the whole market's got to digest the IRA and figure out where's the right time and place and way of doing that. So that's one. I'm certainly eager for some real projects to get announced and actually to get to happen. And it's an enormous amount of talk in an industry that I think in all of North America, the biggest green hydrogen project is like 25 megawatts right now, and people are talking about gigawatt scale projects. So a few of these effectively getting off the ground, getting construction, ultimately operating and having success stories that people can look at, I think is going to be really important too. And I think, I think those initial success stories too. We all read the news headline every day, and when we read some successful projects that have happened those first few, everybody should say, gosh, should we do something like that? So I think there'll be a cascading through heavy industry. They see a few leaders sign up to do a few of these projects and saying, okay, maybe there's some smart guys. They've looked through this and decided to pull the trigger and do it. So I think I'm going to start taking a harder look at it. So I'm eager to see all those things happen and the market to form. So like I said, in the early days, hydrogen purchase contracts are not flying off the shelf. It's a very, very early days market. So seeing that market come together, especially with end users, and especially in industry, is important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of love what you said there, because it ties back to, in my mind, everything being more collaborative. And, there's always going to be a natural level of competition and everywhere, right? But, keeping in mind the fact that everything is fairly new, and there are going to be businesses that are sort of leading the way. And, despite the level of healthy competition that, we expect and want in the market to kind of push each other to keep moving forward, it's cool because there are businesses that, as you said, right now we're talking about megawatts of what's like operating, and businesses are talking about in development gigawatts. And as some of those, some of those developers start to lead the way, it's going to open up the doors for other people to start going in and saying, oh, well, they've put together a gigawatt pipeline of green hydrogen projects. Yeah. We could do that too. And I think that's going to be huge for just motivating the market to grow and grow and grow, and just get everything deployed and get it out onto the market.
Yeah, for sure.
Just to kind of transition into closing a little bit, if you're open to it, I'd love to give you an opportunity to share a little bit more about some passion projects you're working on. If you're comfortable telling everyone a little bit more about Ambient Fuels and a little bit more depth on the work you guys are doing there, I'd love to hear more about that as well. Or just anything you're excited to talk about in this market.
Yeah, so maybe I'll start with just a real brief about Ambient Fuels. So we are a pure play green hydrogen developer. And I think when we put the company together, that didn't really exist. And it's still, there's a few now, but it's still fairly rare, a company that's all we think about all day, every day is that. And how do we be the very, very best at, electrolysis hydrogen production plants? So it's been really cool to be a part of something like that. And we've put together a really interesting team of folks, both from renewable energy, but also from conventional energy. And it's really interesting, the debates we have. We all come from very different technical and business backgrounds, and we're both in a new industry for us. So, merging the best practices from those two industries and letting go of things that are not best practices, that, hey, this is how we did it in wind, but that doesn't work here. This is a very different animal. So it's been fun working with the team, and every day because it's such early days, figuring out what is the right way to design these, what is the right way to do the structuring of the commercial offtake. So that is a ton of fun. Something else I would say, you kind of touched on it in your comments a moment ago. The energy and enthusiasm around the space is just unbelievable. And yeah, there's an element of, oh my gosh, there's an awful lot of competition now, but I feel like it's almost a limitless opportunity set that's out there. And so we spend very little of our time worrying that we're going to get out competed by a competitor, and it's much more about working with people across the technology, the end users, a lot of traditional energy players. Working, we're meeting kind of every day with partners like that and figuring out where are they going to play in the space. It's quite common for us to start a discussion as a potential customer, round through them being a potential competitor, and end up with them being a partner. So, they're all trying to figure out, is hydrogen kind of a boring utility that I want somebody else to do, or is it an exciting industry of the future and I want to be a part of it? It's just a lot of fun brainstorming with companies and figuring out where people are on their journey and how we might work with them. So that's been really cool. Last little thing I'll say on the personal note, I just dropped my last kid off at college, and she decided she's going into environmental engineering, which I thought was just the very coolest thing. And I didn't pressure her at all to do that, but I think it's so cool that there are a lot of kids these days who are inspired by what the clean energy industry might do, and are kind of heading that way on their educational path out of school. So.
Yeah, and everything you just said right there ties back to my closing thoughts on the fact that one, obviously we all have our jobs we come to do day in and day out. We have the things we're responsible for, but I think that everyone, I think I could speak for everyone when we say we're all on a journey. We're all learning new things every day. It's kind of an adventure, this green hydrogen and clean fuel space. And I think that the reason why I think there's so much collaboration in this space, and why I think there's almost a nice balance between healthy competition and collaboration, is because everything's new to a lot of us. Therefore, there's also that aspect of us being able to make an impact and make a difference. Just evident by the fact that I'm sure your daughter, looks up to you, and she sees the work that you've done over the course of your career, and it's going into environmental engineering. So I think that's just a huge thing I think everyone should be keeping in mind is, we're here to collaborate. We're here to have fun. We're here to learn, new things as we go along. And as we continue to move forward, and as everyone does their own thing, people are going to learn from each other, and people are going to share ideas, hopefully, and I think it's just going to benefit everyone. And I think ultimately everyone has the same end goal in mind, which is the energy transition, which is decarbonization, setting up for a cleaner, healthier planet for our kids in the future, to have a better place to live, so to speak. So,
absolutely,
Chris, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much for speaking with us today.
I enjoyed it. Thank you.